The woman who rode into Wichita, Kansas on that scorching afternoon in June of 1878 carried herself like she had forgotten what it meant to trust another living soul. And ranch hand Russell Kane noticed her the moment her horse kicked up dust on Main Street. She dismounted outside the general store with movements that spoke of exhaustion and determination in equal measure. Her dark blonde hair pulled back severely under a worn hat, her riding clothes practical but threadbare. Russell had been loading feed onto his wagon when he caught sight of her, and something about the way she held herself, ramrod straight despite obvious weariness, made him pause mid-motion. The bag of grain slipped slightly in his grip as he watched her tie her horse to the hitching post with efficient, practiced movements. Her face, though dirt-streaked and sun-weathered, held a quiet beauty that took his breath away, but it was her eyes that truly caught his attention. When she glanced briefly in his direction, he saw emptiness there, a void where warmth should have lived. He nodded politely, touching the brim of his hat. She looked straight through him as if he were made of glass, then turned and walked into the store without acknowledgement. Russell stood there holding that feed bag, feeling something shift in his chest that he could not quite name. He was 24 years old and had seen his share of hardened people in this unforgiving land, but this woman was different. She was not just hard. She was sealed shut, locked away from the world behind barriers he could see even from across the dusty street. "You planning to load that wagon today or just admire the scenery?" called out his boss, Thomas Miller, from inside the feed store doorway. Thomas was a good man, fair and honest, who owned the Triple M Ranch 5 miles outside of town where Russell had worked for the past 3 years. Russell shook himself from his reverie and hefted the bag into the wagon bed. "Sorry, boss. Got distracted." Thomas followed his gaze to where the woman had disappeared inside. That would be Prudence Collins. Bought the old Henderson place about a week ago. Came from back east somewhere, though she does not say much about it. Paying cash for everything, keeping to herself. Martha tried to invite her to church last Sunday, but she declined politely enough. Russell absorbed this information, storing it away like precious water in a drought. Prudence Collins. The name suited her somehow, proper and strong. The Henderson place. That property has been sitting empty for 2 years. House needs work. She knows it. Bought it anyway, along with enough supplies to fix it up herself, apparently. Woman knows her way around a hammer from what Albert at the hardware store says. She has been in there 3 times this week buying nails, wood, shingles. Does not ask for help, does not accept offers of it either. Russell finished loading the last bag and tied down the canvas covering. Everyone needs help sometimes. Try telling her that, Thomas said with a slight smile. Come on, we have got 3 more stops before we head back to the ranch. Susan is making beef stew tonight, and she will have my hide if we are late. They completed their errands around town, but Russell's mind kept drifting back to Prudence Collins. When they finally headed out of Wichita, as the sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the prairie in shades of gold and amber, he found himself watching the road that led toward the old Henderson place. Smoke rose from the chimney, a thin gray line against the darkening sky. She had already gotten the fireplace working then. It was something, at least. Over the following weeks, Russell found excuses to ride into town more often than strictly necessary. He told himself he was not looking for her, but his eyes always searched the streets, the store windows, anywhere she might appear. He caught glimpses occasionally. She came to town for supplies every Saturday morning, always alone, always with that same closed-off expression that made his heart ache with questions he had no right to ask. He learned more about her through the town gossip, though Prudence herself volunteered nothing. She had come from Philadelphia. She was a widow, some said, though no one knew for certain. She was running from something, others whispered, though what that something might be remained pure speculation. She worked her small property from dawn until dusk, repairing fences, clearing land, tending to the few chickens and the milk cow she had purchased. She was surviving, but just barely, on the edge of something that looked like determination but might have been desperation. Russell watched from a distance, respecting her obvious desire for solitude even as something in him yearned to cross that divide. He was not a man who believed in love at first sight or any such nonsense. He had grown up on these plains, the son of homesteaders who had lost everything to drought and disease when he was 18. He had learned early that life was hard work and perseverance, not fairy tales. But there was something about Prudence Collins that called to him in a way he could not ignore, a recognition of pain that echoed his own losses, and a fierce independence that he both admired and wanted to shelter. 3 months after she had arrived in Wichita, Russell finally found his excuse to approach her. He had been in town picking up medication for one of the horses when he saw her struggling with a wheel that had come loose from her wagon outside the blacksmith shop. She was trying to lift the wagon bed by herself, her face red with exertion, sweat dampening her collar. The blacksmith, old Henry Cooper, stood nearby explaining what needed to be done, but he had arthritis so bad he could barely hold his hammer anymore. His apprentice had gone to Junction City for the week to visit family. Russell tied his horse and walked over without overthinking it. "Excuse me, madam. Looks like you could use a hand with that." Prudence looked up, her green eyes meeting his for the first time with full attention. Up close, he could see the lines of fatigue around those eyes, the way her jaw set with stubborn pride. "I can manage, thank you." "I am sure you can," Russell said evenly, "but it would go faster with two, and Henry here needs to get underneath to fix the axle properly. I am Russell Kane. I work at the Triple M Ranch." "I know who you are," she said, and he felt absurdly pleased that she had noticed him at all. "You have been in town more often lately." So she had been watching too, at least peripherally. That was something. "Ranch business," he said simply. "May I help?" No strings attached, just one neighbor helping another. She studied him for a long moment, and he could see the internal struggle playing across her features. Pride warred with practicality, suspicion battled against need. Finally, she stepped back with a curt nod. "Fine, thank you." Together they lifted the wagon enough for Henry to slide underneath and examine the broken axle. The blacksmith whistled low. "This is going to take a couple hours to fix proper, Miss Collins. Metal is cracked clean through. I will need to forge a new piece." Prudence's face fell, though she tried to hide it. "How much will that cost?" Henry named a price that was fair but clearly strained her resources. Russell saw her fingers tighten on her skirt, saw the quick calculation behind her eyes. "Could you do it for less if I help with the work?" she asked. "Miss Collins, you know I would help if I could, but this is skilled work. Take someone who knows metalworking," Henry said apologetically. "I will cover half," Russell said before he could stop himself. When both of them looked at him in surprise, he continued. "The main road between here and the ranch passes right by your property. I have noticed the ruts are getting bad. If you would let me bring some gravel and tools to help smooth out that section, we will call it an even trade." It was a flimsy excuse, and they all knew it. The road was not that bad, but it gave her a way to accept help without it being charity, and Russell hoped that would make the difference. Prudence's eyes narrowed slightly as she studied him, trying to discern his motives. Whatever she saw there must have satisfied her minimal requirements for trust, because she finally nodded once, sharply. "All right. That seems fair." Henry looked between them with the knowing expression of someone who had seen many years of human nature. "Well then, that is settled." Come back around 5 o'clock, Miss Collins. I will have her fixed up for you. I have errands to run, Prudence said. Thank you both. She walked away without another word, her spine straight, her walls firmly back in place. Henry chuckled once she was out of earshot. That is one guarded woman right there. Been trying to figure her out since she arrived. Martha says she has the saddest eyes she has ever seen. Russell watched Prudence's retreating figure. Everyone has their reasons for protecting themselves. True enough, Henry agreed. You planning to actually fix that road? I am planning to try, Russell said honestly. If she will let me. 2 days later, Russell showed up at Prudence's property with a wagon full of gravel and tools. He had gotten Thomas's permission to take a day for personal business, and his boss had given him a knowing look, but asked no questions. The Henderson place looked better than it had when she had first arrived. The sagging porch had been reinforced, new shingles patched the worst of the roof, and the fence line, while still needing work, had been partially restored. Prudence emerged from the house as he pulled up, wiping her hands on her apron. Mr. Kane, I was not expecting you so soon. No time like the present, he said, climbing down from the wagon. Thought I would get started on that road work. It is my day off. She looked at the wagon, then at him, suspicion creeping back into her expression. This is too much. The road does not need this much work. Russell decided honesty was his best approach. You are right. It does not. But I made you a deal, and I like to follow through on my word. If there is gravel left over, maybe we could fill in some of those ruts in your lane too. Looks like the rain last week did some damage. Why are you doing this? The question came out blunt, almost harsh. What do you want from me? He met her eyes steadily. Nothing you are not willing to give. I am just trying to be neighborly, Miss Collins. This is hard country. People need to help each other to survive. I have been surviving just fine on my own. I can see that, Russell said, and he meant it. You have done impressive work here, but surviving and living are not always the same thing. Something flickered in her eyes at that, quickly suppressed. I should get back to my work. Do what you need to do. She turned to go back inside. Miss Collins. He waited until she paused and looked back. Would you consider having some coffee with me when I take a break around noon? You do not have to tell me anything about yourself. We could just sit and drink coffee like two people who happen to be in the same place at the same time. For a moment he thought she would refuse, but then she gave the smallest nod. Maybe, if I am not too busy. He counted that as a victory and got to work. The Kansas sun beat down as he shoveled gravel and tamped down the road surface. It was hard, sweaty labor, but he had grown up doing hard work. His muscles remembered the rhythm of it, and his mind was free to wander. He thought about what little he knew of Prudence Collins, trying to piece together the puzzle of her. She was probably around his age, maybe a year or two younger. She had money enough to buy property and supplies, so she was not destitute, but she stretched every dollar as if it might be her last. She knew how to work with her hands, which suggested she had not always lived a privileged Eastern life. And those walls around her heart, they had been built brick by careful brick over time, by experiences that had taught her trust was too dangerous to risk. Around noon, as promised, Prudence emerged from the house carrying 2 tin cups of coffee. She walked down the lane to where Russell was working, her steps hesitant but determined. He straightened up, wiping sweat from his forehead with his sleeve, and accepted the cup with a grateful nod. Thank you kindly. They stood there for a moment in awkward silence, sipping the hot, bitter liquid. Russell leaned against the wagon, trying to appear relaxed and non-threatening. Prudence stood several feet away, maintaining that careful distance. You are making good progress, she finally said, gesturing toward the road. It is coming along. Should have it finished by this afternoon. More silence. Russell searched for something to say that would not feel like prying. "How are you finding Kansas?" "I imagine it is different from Philadelphia." Her eyes cut to him sharply. "Who told you I was from Philadelphia? Small town. People talk. I do not mean to intrude." She was quiet for so long he thought she would not respond, but then she spoke, her voice carefully neutral. "It is different. Wider, emptier. The sky feels bigger here." "Does that bother you, the emptiness?" "No." The answer came quickly, definitely. "I prefer it." Russell nodded, understanding more than she had said. She wanted space between herself and other people, room to breathe without anyone close enough to hurt her. "The open prairie can be healing that way. When my parents died, I used to ride out alone for hours. Something about all that space made the grief feel less suffocating." He had not meant to share that, but once it was out, he did not regret it. Prudence's expression softened almost imperceptibly. "How old were you?" 18. Fever took them both within a week of each other. I was left with a failing homestead and debts I could not pay. Lost the land eventually, but I learned that sometimes starting over is not the same as giving up." Prudence looked down at her coffee, and he thought he saw her hand tremble slightly. "No, it is not," she said quietly. Then, as if catching herself sharing too much, she stiffened again. "I should let you get back to work. Thank you for the conversation." She walked back to the house before he could respond, but Russell felt like they had crossed some small bridge together. She had stayed. She had talked. She had shown, for just a moment, that there was a real person behind those walls, someone capable of empathy and maybe even connection. The weeks that followed fell into a pattern. Russell found reasons to ride by Prudence's property, always with some practical excuse. He fixed a section of her fence that had blown down in a storm. He helped her pull a stubborn tree stump that was blocking good planting ground. He brought her eggs from the ranch when their hens were producing more than they could use. Prudence accepted these offerings with wary gratitude, always insisting on some form of payment or trade. She baked bread in return, or mended a torn shirt he had been meaning to fix, or helped him load supplies when they happened to be in town at the same time. They developed a friendship of sorts, built on these small exchanges and careful conversations that never delved too deep. Russell learned that she took her coffee black, that she had a way with animals that spoke of kindness despite her guarded nature, and that she sang sometimes when she thought no one could hear, old melancholy songs that made his chest tight with longing to know what had put that sorrow in her voice. What he did not learn was anything about her past, about what had brought her to Kansas, about the shadows that lived behind her eyes. Whenever conversation drifted too close to personal history, she would change the subject or simply excuse herself. Russell did not push. He had meant what he said about wanting nothing she was not willing to give. He was content to wait, to be present, to show her through action that not all people were threats. Autumn came to the Kansas prairie, painting the grasslands in shades of gold and rust. The air turned crisp, and the work of preparing for winter occupied everyone's attention. Russell helped Thomas and the other ranch hands bring in the cattle from summer pasture, mend fences before the snow came, and stock the barns with hay and feed. But his thoughts remained often with Prudence, wondering how she would fare in her first Kansas winter, whether her repairs would hold against the harsh winds, whether she had enough firewood laid by. His concerns proved justified when an early October storm rolled in with unexpected ferocity. Russell was in town delivering some horses for sale when the sky turned ominous, dark clouds gathering with ominous speed. He completed his business as quickly as possible, but by the time he headed back toward the ranch, the wind was already howling and the first fat drops of rain were falling. He made it as far as Prudence's property before the storm hit in full force. Lightning split the sky, and rain came down in sheets so thick he could barely see the road ahead. He thought about pushing on, but through the deluge he caught sight of Prudence's barn door flapping wildly in the wind. If it tore off, her animals would be exposed to the full brunt of the storm. Without thinking further, he guided his horse off the road and toward her property. Prudence was already outside, soaked to the skin, struggling to secure the barn door against the wind. Russell dismounted and ran to help her, adding his strength to hers as they forced the door closed and dropped the securing bar into place. The wind tried to rip it open again immediately, and Russell grabbed rope from his saddle bag, working quickly to tie additional reinforcement. Inside, he shouted over the roar of the storm, pointing toward the house. Prudence shook her head stubbornly, pointing toward the chicken coop where several birds huddled miserably against the side of the structure. The coop itself was listing dangerously, about to collapse. Together they ran through the mud and rain, grabbing frightened chickens and carrying them quickly to the more secure barn. It took 3 trips, both of them slipping and sliding in the muck, before all the birds were safe. By then they were both thoroughly drenched and shivering. Lightning struck somewhere close, the crack of thunder immediate and deafening. Prudence grabbed Russell's arm and pulled him toward the house. They stumbled inside just as hail began to fall, chunks of ice the size of walnuts hammering the roof and windows. She slammed the door shut behind them and leaned against it, breathing hard. For a moment they just stood there in the dim interior, dripping water onto her floor, listening to the fury of the storm outside. Then Prudence started to laugh, a sound Russell had never heard from her before. It was startled and genuine, breaking through her usual reserve like sun through clouds. "We must look like drowned rats," she said between gasps. Russell looked down at himself, then at her, and could not help but join in her laughter. They did indeed look ridiculous, covered in mud and soaked to the bone. "I have certainly been drier." Prudence pushed wet hair out of her face, and for the first time since he had met her, she smiled at him without reservation. The expression transformed her entire face, revealing the beauty that her walls usually kept hidden. Russell felt his heart stutter in his chest, and in that moment, he knew with absolute certainty that he was falling in love with this complicated, guarded woman. "Let me get you some dry clothes," Prudence said, seeming suddenly aware of the intimacy of the situation. "I have some things that belong to. I have some men's clothes that might fit you, and I will make coffee. You cannot possibly ride back to the ranch in this storm. You will have to wait it out here." She disappeared into another room, leaving Russell standing in her small, neat kitchen. He looked around, taking in details he had never had a chance to observe before. The house was spare but clean, with few personal touches. No photographs on the walls, no trinkets or mementos. It was the home of someone who had left everything behind and chosen not to replace it, or perhaps someone who was afraid to put down roots that might have to be torn up again. Prudence returned with a shirt and pants, worn but serviceable. "These should fit. You can change in there," she pointed to a small room off the kitchen. "I will change too and get the fire built up." When Russell emerged a few minutes later in dry clothes, Prudence had indeed gotten the fire going and was hanging their wet things near it to dry. She had changed into a simple brown dress, her hair wrapped in a towel. The domestic scene felt both comfortable and charged with an awareness that made Russell's pulse quicken. "Thank you," Prudence said as she poured coffee and handed him a cup, "for helping with the animals. I would have lost the chickens without you." "Happy to help." That storm came up fast. They sat at her small table, the storm continuing to rage outside. The howling wind and drumming hail created a cocoon of sound that isolated them from the rest of the world. Russell cradled his coffee cup, wanting to make conversation but afraid of saying the wrong thing, of pushing her back behind her walls now that they seemed to have lowered slightly. Prudence spoke first. "Why do you keep helping me, Russell? And please do not say it is just being neighborly. We both know you go out of your way." He had known this question would come eventually. He took a sip of coffee, considering his words carefully. "Because I see someone who is working harder than they should have to alone. Because I admire your strength. Because your company makes me happy, even when you are being stubborn about accepting help." He paused, then decided to risk honesty. "Because I would like to be your friend if you will let me." "Friend," she repeated, as if testing the word. "I have not had a friend in a long time." "That sounds lonely. It has been safer." The words came out quiet but firm. She looked down at her coffee, her next words even softer. "I had a husband. His name was William. We met in Philadelphia 5 years ago. I thought he was kind, thoughtful. I thought I knew him." Russell held very still, afraid that any movement would stop this fragile sharing. Prudence continued, her voice taking on a distant quality as if she were reciting facts about someone else's life. "After we married, he changed. Or maybe he just stopped pretending to be someone he was not. He was cruel. Not always physically, though that happened too. But it was the other cruelties that hurt most. The way he would belittle everything I did, every thought I had. The way he isolated me from my family and friends. The way he made me feel like I was nothing, worthless, that I should be grateful he tolerated my existence." Russell's hands tightened on his cup, anger rising in his throat at this man he had never met. "Prudence. I stayed for 3 years," she continued as if he had not spoken. "I kept thinking if I just tried harder, if I just learned to be what he wanted, it would get better. But it never did. It only got worse. Then one night he hurt me badly enough that I ended up at a doctor's office. The doctor, bless him, he saw what was happening. He helped me understand it was not my fault. He gave me money and the name of someone who could help me disappear." She finally looked up, meeting Russell's eyes, and he saw the depth of pain there, the scars that might never fully heal. "William looked for me for a while, I think. That is why I came so far west, why I use only my maiden name now. I left everything behind except what I could carry. I came here to start over, to be someone new, someone strong enough never to let anyone have that kind of power over me again." The room was silent except for the crackle of the fire and the storm outside. Russell felt the weight of what she had shared, the trust it represented, and he chose his words as carefully as he ever had in his life. "Thank you for telling me. I know that could not have been easy." He set down his coffee and looked at her steadily. "You were strong then, Prudence. It takes incredible strength to leave a situation like that, and you are strong now. What you have built here, the life you are making, that is all proof of your courage, but I need you to know something. Not all men are like William. Some of us believe that love means protecting, not harming, supporting, not tearing down. I would never." He stopped, struggling to find the right words. "I would spend my whole life proving to you that you can trust again if you would let me." Prudence's eyes filled with tears that she blinked back quickly. "That is a big promise to make. I am aware of that, and I am not asking you for anything right now. I just want you to know that I see you, the real you, not whatever William tried to make you believe you were. I see a woman who is smart and capable and brave. I see someone worth knowing, worth caring about, and if all we ever are is friends, that will be enough for me. But if someday you think you might want more, I will be here. I am a patient man, Prudence. I am willing to wait." A tear escaped despite her efforts and tracked down her cheek. She brushed it away impatiently. "I do not know if I can ever be what someone wants, what you might want," He broke something in me. You are not broken, Russell said firmly. You are healing. There is a difference. They sat together as the storm gradually lessened outside, talking quietly about smaller things now, safer topics. But something had shifted between them, a foundation laid in honesty and vulnerability. By the time the rain stopped and Russell prepared to leave, Prudence walked him to the door with less distance in her eyes. "Russell," she said as he retrieved his now dry clothes and prepared to change back into them. "Thank you for listening and for understanding. Anytime you want to talk, I am here, about anything or nothing at all." He rode back to the ranch under clearing skies, his heart full of emotions he was still learning to name. He thought about Prudence's story, about the courage it had taken to escape and rebuild. He thought about the responsibility he had just taken on by making his intentions clear. He had meant every word. He would wait as long as it took. She was worth waiting for. The months that followed tested that promise. Winter settled over Kansas with bitter cold and occasional heavy snows. Russell continued to find reasons to check on Prudence, always careful to respect her boundaries while making his steady presence known. He brought her firewood when he noticed her stack getting low. He helped her repair the chicken coop properly after the storm damage. He taught her how to smoke meat to preserve it through the winter months. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, Prudence began to relax around him. The conversations grew longer, more personal. She talked about her childhood, about a father who had been kind before he died when she was 16, about a mother who had remarried quickly to a man who saw Prudence as a burden to be disposed of, which explained her hasty marriage to William. She talked about her love of reading, how she had taught herself carpentry from a book, her dreams of eventually expanding her property and maybe raising horses. Russell shared his own stories in return. He told her about growing up on the prairie, about learning to rope cattle before he could properly write his name. He talked about his parents, keeping their memory alive through the telling. He confessed his dreams too, modest as they were. He wanted his own small ranch someday, a place to build something lasting. He wanted a family, though he was careful in how he said it, not wanting to pressure her. Christmas came, and Russell spent it at the ranch with Thomas's family as he had for the past few years. But he brought a gift to Prudence on Christmas Eve, a book of poetry he had ordered from Junction City. She gave him a scarf she had knitted, the wool soft and warm. They drank cider by her fire and talked late into the night, and when he left, she squeezed his hand briefly, a gesture of affection that made him feel like he had received the greatest present imaginable. The new year of 1879 began with a blizzard that lasted 3 days. Russell worried constantly about Prudence alone on her property, but the snow was too deep to travel. When the storm finally cleared, he rode out as soon as the roads were passable. He found her safe but nearly out of firewood, her face drawn with exhaustion from staying up nights to keep the fire going. He stayed for 2 days, cutting wood and making sure she had enough to last the rest of the winter. She did not protest his presence, and they fell into an easy rhythm of working together during the day and talking by the fire at night. On the second evening, as they sat in comfortable silence, Prudence spoke quietly. "I have been thinking." Russell looked up from the piece of harness leather he was mending for her. "About what?" "About walls. About how mine have kept me safe but also kept me lonely." She turned to face him, and he could see the struggle in her expression, fear battling with hope. "You have been so patient with me. So kind, and I know I have not been easy to care about." "You have been worth every moment," Russell said honestly. "I do not know if I am ready for everything that might mean a real courtship, but I think I would like to try, if your offer still stands." Russell's heart leaped, but he kept his voice calm, not wanting to overwhelm her. It stands. It will always stand, and we will go at whatever pace you need. There is no rush." Prudence smiled, tentative but real. "Then yes. I would like you to court me properly, Russell Kane." He stood and crossed to where she sat, kneeling in front of her chair so they were at eye level. "May I hold your hand?" She nodded, and he took her hand gently in his, marveling at the trust this represented. Her fingers were work roughened but delicate, and they trembled slightly in his grasp. "I will not hurt you," he promised. "I will do everything in my power to make you happy, to keep you safe, to help you heal." "I know," she whispered. "That is why I am willing to try." They stayed like that for a long moment, hands clasped, a promise exchanged without words. Russell felt the magnitude of what she was offering him, the bravery it took for her to risk her heart again. He vowed silently that he would prove worthy of that trust. The courtship that followed was unlike any Russell had imagined. It was slow and careful, built on the friendship they had already established. He visited Prudence 3 times a week, always announced, always respectful of her space and boundaries. They worked on projects together around her property. He taught her to shoot properly so she could hunt for herself. She taught him the constellations she had learned from her father as a child. They talked about everything and nothing. Political upheavals in Washington, the weather, philosophy and religion, their favorite foods, childhood memories both good and bad. Russell learned the small details that made Prudence who she was. How she wrinkled her nose when she was concentrating, the way she hummed when she was content, her fierce protectiveness of her animals, her quiet sense of humor that emerged more often as she grew comfortable with him. Spring arrived, bringing with it new life and new hope. Prudence's property bloomed with wildflowers, and she started a garden that showed promise. Russell helped her plow the small field, and they planted together, their hands muddy, their conversation easy. One warm afternoon in May, as they rested in the shade after planting, Prudence leaned her head against Russell's shoulder. It was the first time she had initiated such contact, and he held perfectly still, hardly daring to breathe. After a moment, he slowly put his arm around her shoulders. She did not pull away. "Is this all right?" he asked quietly. "Yes," she said. "It is nice. I forgot that touch could be nice." They sat like that for a long time, watching clouds drift across the endless blue sky. Russell felt such tenderness toward this woman who was slowly learning to trust again, who was choosing to risk her heart despite everything she had been through. He loved her, had loved her for months now, but he held the words back. She would need to hear them eventually, but only when she was ready. That moment came in June, on the anniversary of the day she had ridden into Wichita. They had taken a picnic to a spot by the creek that ran through her property, and they lay on a blanket watching the water flow past. Prudence was quieter than usual, reflective. "A year ago today I came here," she said. "I remember thinking that I would never let anyone close to me again, that I would live alone and that would be enough. What do you think now?" Russell asked, though his heart hammered with anticipation of her answer. She rolled onto her side to face him, propping herself up on one elbow. "Now I think that being alone and being lonely are not the same thing. I was alone in my marriage to William because he made me feel isolated even when he was in the same room. But with you, even when you are not here, I do not feel lonely anymore. I feel connected to something good." Russell reached up and gently brushed a strand of hair away from her face, his fingers lingering on her cheek. "You are the strongest, bravest person I have ever met. You make me want to be better, to build something worth having. I love you, Prudence. I have loved you almost from the moment I saw you. I know you might not be ready to say it back, and that is all right. I just want you to know." Tears gathered in her eyes, but this time she did not brush them away. "I think I love you too. It terrifies me, but I do." You make me want to believe in good things again." "You can believe in this," Russell said softly. "In us. I promise you can." She leaned down and kissed him, tentative and sweet. Russell responded carefully, letting her control the pace, the depth of it. When she pulled back, she was smiling through her tears. "I want more than courtship," she said. "I want a life with you, a real life. I want to trust you with everything I am. I am still scared, but I am tired of letting fear make my decisions." Russell sat up, drawing her with him. "Are you saying what I think you are saying?" "I am saying I want to marry you, Russell Kane, if you will have me, broken pieces and all." "You are not broken," he said firmly, taking both her hands in his. "And yes, yes, 1,000 times yes. I will marry you and spend every day showing you what love should be." They married a month later in a simple ceremony at the church in Wichita. Thomas stood up as Russell's witness, and Martha Miller served as Prudence's attendant. The whole town turned out, curious about the reclusive woman who had finally let someone past her walls. Prudence wore a simple blue dress, and flowers from her garden crowned her hair. She was beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with her appearance, and everything to do with the joy that finally reached her eyes. They made their home on Prudence's property, combining their resources to improve the land and buildings. Russell continued working at the Triple M Ranch, but he and Thomas negotiated a new arrangement that allowed him to spend more time developing his own small operation. He bought cattle with money he had saved, and Prudence proved to have a natural talent for horse training, gentling wild mustangs with patience and skill. The first year of their marriage was not without challenges. There were nights when Prudence woke from nightmares about William, and Russell learned to hold her through the fear without trying to fix it with words. There were moments when she would freeze up, old habits of self-protection rising like walls between them, and Russell learned to give her space while making it clear he was not going anywhere. But slowly, steadily, Prudence healed. She laughed more freely. She sang without thinking someone might criticize her voice. She offered opinions without fear of ridicule. She learned that disagreement did not have to mean danger, that Russell could be frustrated or tired without it becoming her fault. She learned that love could be a safe place to land instead of a trap to escape. Russell, for his part, discovered that loving someone who had been hurt required patience and consciousness he had not known he possessed. He learned to communicate clearly, to ask permission before surprising her with changes, to recognize when she needed closeness and when she needed space. He learned that healing was not linear, that there would be setbacks mixed with progress. He learned that the walls coming down did not mean they would never go back up, but that each time they did, they came down a little easier. 2 years after their wedding, Prudence told him she was pregnant. She was anxious about motherhood, afraid her past would somehow damage their child, but Russell reassured her that she had more love and strength to give than she realized. Their son was born in the spring of 1881, a healthy boy with Russell's dark hair and Prudence's green eyes. They named him Thomas after the man who had given Russell a chance when he needed one. Holding their son for the first time, Prudence cried tears of joy and grief mixed together. "I never thought I would have this. A real family. A life I actually wanted to live." "You deserve all of this and more," Russell told her, his own eyes damp as he looked at his wife and child. "You fought for it. You earned it." Life settled into new rhythms with a baby, sleepless nights and endless diapers, first smiles and new developments. Thomas was an easy baby, cheerful and curious, and watching Prudence with him filled Russell with awe. She was gentle but not fearful, protective but not smothering. She was the mother she had never had, giving their son the security she had lacked. The small ranch prospered. Russell's cattle operation grew slowly but steadily. Prudence's horse training earned her a reputation across the county, and people traveled specifically to buy horses she had trained. They hired a hand to help with the work, a young man named Jacob who reminded Russell of himself at that age, hungry for opportunity and willing to work hard. More children came. A daughter in 1883, who they named Elizabeth after Prudence's mother's mother, reaching back to claim good memories from her family history. Another son in 1885, named Daniel for no one in particular, but simply because they liked the name. Their house expanded to accommodate the growing family, rooms added as resources allowed. Through it all, Russell kept his promise. He remained patient, present, proving day by day that love could be trusted. And Prudence continued to blossom, the woman she had always been meant to be emerging from the shadows of her past. She became a leader in the community, organizing a women's group that helped new arrivals to the area. She volunteered at the school, teaching children to read. She never spoke publicly about her past, but there were whispers that she helped other women in difficult situations, offering refuge and resources to those who needed to escape. 10 years after their wedding, Russell woke one morning to find Prudence already awake, watching him with an expression he had learned meant she was thinking deep thoughts. "What is on your mind?" he asked, reaching out to trace her cheekbone with one finger. "I was just thinking about walls. About how I rode into Wichita all those years ago, determined never to let anyone close again. About how certain I was that keeping everyone out was the only way to stay safe. And now I know that safety is not the same as happiness. Now I know that the right person does not try to scale your walls or tear them down. The right person just waits patiently at the gate until you are ready to open it yourself." She smiled at him, that radiant expression he never grew tired of seeing. "Thank you for waiting for me." "I would wait a lifetime for you," Russell said simply. "Though I am grateful I did not have to." They kissed slowly, a decade of trust and love in the gesture, and Russell marveled at the journey they had traveled together. From that first day when she had looked straight through him as if he did not exist, to this moment of perfect intimacy and connection. The years continued to pass, marked by the ordinary joys and challenges of life. Children grew and presented new complications. The ranch prospered and faced setbacks, good years and lean ones. Russell's hair started to gray at the temples. Prudence developed laugh lines around her eyes, a visible map of happiness earned through hard work and healing. Their children grew knowing their parents' love was a given, something stable and secure they could count on. Thomas, their eldest, became a thoughtful young man who talked of becoming a doctor. Elizabeth was creative and spirited, always bringing home injured animals to nurse back to health. Daniel was quieter, more introspective, with a gift for seeing through to the heart of things. In 1895, when Thomas Jr. was 14, he asked his mother one evening why she had no family pictures from before they moved to Kansas. It was an innocent question, but Russell saw Prudence stiffen slightly, old reflexes rising before she consciously relaxed again. She looked at Russell, and he nodded encouragement. She had told the children age-appropriate versions of her past as they grew, never lying but not sharing details they were too young to understand. Now, she decided they were old enough for more truth. "I left my old life behind when I came to Kansas," she said carefully. "I was married before I met your father to a man who was not kind. I had to leave him to be safe, and I left everything behind, including photographs and mementos. Sometimes starting over means leaving the past where it belongs." Thomas considered this with the seriousness he brought to everything. "Were you afraid when you came here?" "Terrified," Prudence admitted, "but also hopeful, And it turned out that hope was the right choice. Because you met Papa. Because I met your Papa, yes. And because I learned that I was strong enough to build a new life. That is important to remember, all of you. You are stronger than you know. And when life is hard, you can survive it and come out better on the other side. Russell watched his family, his heart full to bursting. This woman who had arrived in Wichita with walls around her heart now sat surrounded by children who had never known anything but love. She had not just survived, she had thrived. They both had. More years passed, the rhythm of life on the Kansas prairie continuing its steady beat. The children grew into young adults with lives and dreams of their own. Thomas attended medical school in Kansas City, writing long letters home about his studies. Elizabeth married a neighboring rancher's son and stayed close, raising her own family just a few miles away. Daniel took over more and more of the ranch operations, showing a natural talent for the work. Russell and Prudence grew old together, their love deepening with each passing year. They sat together on their porch in the evenings, watching the sun set over land they had worked and improved together. They held hands like young sweethearts, fingers intertwined, comfortable in the silence of people who knew each other completely. "You ever regret it?" Russell asked one evening in 1910 when they were both well into their 50s. "Coming to Kansas, everything that happened." Prudence looked at him with surprise. "Regret? How could I regret the best decision I ever made? It was hard. The work, the healing, you had to fight for everything." "That is true," she agreed, "but fighting for something good is different than fighting to escape something bad. I fought to get away from William, but I fought to build this life with you. That is all the difference in the world." She leaned her head on his shoulder, and they watched the stars emerge as darkness fell. Crickets sang in the grass, and somewhere a coyote called to its pack. The sounds of home, of a life fully lived. "I love you," Russell said, as he had said thousands of times over the decades. The words never got old, never lost their meaning. "I love you too," Prudence replied. "Thank you for waiting until I was ready to let you in." "Best thing I ever did," Russell said simply. They lived many more years together, growing old with the grace that comes from a life well lived. They saw grandchildren born and helped raise them with wisdom earned through experience. They weathered droughts and economic hardships, always facing challenges together. They celebrated triumphs and mourned losses, always returning to each other as home base. When Russell died in 1923 at the age of 69, it was peacefully in his sleep with Prudence beside him. She held his hand and told him she loved him one final time, knowing that he had heard her even as he slipped away. The grief was profound, but it was the grief of having loved deeply and been loved in return, so different from the empty ache she had known in her youth. Prudence lived another 8 years, surrounded by children and grandchildren who carried forward the legacy of love she and Russell had built. She told their story often in her later years, wanting the younger generation to understand that broken things could be mended, that walls could come down, that patience and genuine love could heal even the deepest wounds. She passed away in 1931 at the age of 76, sitting in the garden she had first planted with Russell all those years ago. Her daughter Elizabeth found her there, peaceful and still, a smile on her face as if she were seeing something beautiful that no one else could see. They buried her next to Russell on the property they had built together, under the wide Kansas sky they had both loved. The headstones were simple, bearing their names and dates, and beneath that a single phrase: "Together they built something worth having." The ranch continued, passed down through Daniel and his children, a testament to two people who had found each other when both needed finding. The story of Russell and Prudence became family legend, told and retold to new generations, evolving but keeping its essential truth. She had come to Kansas with walls around her heart, determined never to trust or love again. He had seen past those walls to the woman beneath, and he had waited with patient faith until she was ready to open the gate. Together, they had proved that time and genuine love could heal anything, that the right person was worth waiting for, and that happy endings were possible even for those who had known the deepest pain. Their love had been a quiet revolution, a daily choice to show up and be present, to honor wounds while refusing to let them define the future. It had not been easy or simple, but it had been real and deep and lasting. And in the end, that was all that mattered. They had found each other, fought for each other, and built a life together that blessed everyone it touched. The land they worked together still stands, passed down through generations. The house they expanded to hold their growing family still shelters their descendants. The garden Prudence planted still blooms each spring. But more than any physical legacy, what remained was the proof that love, real love built on patience and trust and genuine care, could overcome anything. That walls built for protection could eventually become doors opened in hope. That waiting for the right person for as long as it took was always worth it in the end. And so their story continued, not in their own lives but in the lives they had touched, the love they had modeled, the hope they had proved possible. A cowboy and a woman with walls around her heart, who together had built something beautiful and lasting in the wide Kansas prairie, under skies that went on forever.